Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I know we'll have some more coming on here shortly as we get started today. I'm Brooke Duncan, and I'm the Director of Community Development at Uptown Consortium, and I'll be leading the technology for today's session. Please use the chat function to ask any questions, and feel free to use the chat to message me if you have any technical issues. Welcome. I'm pleased to introduce Franz Stansbury, Director of Real Estate with Uptown Consortium. He will be leading today's session. Franz is UCI's real estate development expert and will cover important design principles in place to ensure the Uptown Innovation Corridor in Cincinnati's Innovation District is planned, designed, and developed in an orderly, consistent, and high-quality urbanistic manner. Franz will discuss 3 development principles critical to realizing Uptown's vision, which are great streets, great spaces, and great places. Take it away, Franz.
Okay, thank you, Brooke. Good afternoon. And welcome to Uptown Insights. This is a virtual best practices series from Uptown Consortium. And today's panel is part of an ongoing effort to engage with the Uptown community and others. For today's discussion, we've invited national and local experts for a virtual presentation and panel on placemaking, covering the principles of placemaking from a master planning and hyper-localized perspective. And you can expect the next hour we'll spend together. We'll provide a brief overview, and then I will kick it off to Sasaki and also the Clifton Cultural Arts Center to present their information. After that, we'll have a Q&A session. And as Brooke mentioned, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat room. And so before I begin setting the stage around the issue and discussion of placemaking, I'd like to very briefly introduce our experts. They can stand up, but you probably won't be able to see it. Fred Merrill is a principal with Sasaki, an international award-winning planning and design firm. They bring a broad, comprehensive vision to the table, and the firm is working with UCI and has been since 2014 to articulate a thoughtful implementation framework that balances the land use, urban design, placemaking, and real estate strategies for Uptown. Result is an execution roadmap to create a world-class urban district, and realizing this vision requires a thoughtful implementation framework that balances the land use, the urban design, the placemaking, and the real estate strategies, and the city's land use and development code, as well as our stakeholder engagements. Next is Leslie Mooney at the Clifton Cultural Arts Center. She will speak to hyper-localized efforts in Uptown and how the Clifton Cultural Arts Center has embraced the principles of placemaking through community educational programming. Leslie has a personal mission to educate, connect, and inspire communities to create a deeper and more fulfilling human experience. And Fred and Leslie, thank you for spending and taking the time today. And so with that, I'd like to sort of get the table set up here for what we're going to be talking about today. There are many uses of the term placemaking. They can be somewhat confusing. The simplest definition that we try to pay attention to is that it's a process of creating quality spaces that people want to live, work, play, and learn in. So what is a quality place? It's a structure or space where the people, the businesses, institutions want to be. Okay, they have to be alluring, they have to be desirable, they have to have some real pizzazz to them to make people want to be there. Standard placemaking is usually incremental and seeks to improve a location over a long period of time and through many separate small projects or activities. That's fine if you have like 20 or 30 years to really kick things loose. The perspective we've taken in Uptown is something called transformative placemaking. It's a type of placemaking, and it's a little bit different than some of the other flavors, such as creative or tactical placemaking. And it's usually differs from most types of placemaking by scope, the scale, the integration of these components. The scope really gets around creating large destinations for work, play, and residential life, bringing everything together. The scale is larger than a block or two. Usually it's much larger than that. It focuses on economic clusters that connect to the larger community. And then the integration, breaking down silos between the institutions, economic development, community development, transportation, healthcare, and others, and blending all these together into this place. These concepts, or I guess strictures in transformative placemaking, have led to the design principles that UCI has instituted and has been using for quite a while, and to guide our future in current decisions for the quality, the design integrity, land use, neighborhood integration of any new development in Uptown. The principles are very simple, really. Great streets. Okay, we want to have great streets. We want the buildings to be tucked up along these streets. So we're talking the urbanity of these great streets. The activity, we need to have those things programmed. We need to be able to make connections through and across these blocks. Mobility, same thing. Safe connections, multimodal, pedestrian, bicycle, transit options. Streetscape, a lot of time and effort is being spent on streetscapes. So we're creating a district that has a unique pedestrian character throughout the corridor. I like to use the term of establishing a pattern language for all of Uptown and the streetscapes that acts as a form of wayfinding as well. And then there's also the quality. We want to prioritize the architectural landscape design, materials, construction quality all along these streets and maintain visual consistency through there. Again, it's part of that branding and that wayfinding. We like to focus on the walkability and the value-added components this brings to any new commercial development or residential development. And then the great spaces, we look at the ecology. I want to do something that really complements the innovation community and the neighborhood. We want to actually do things that enhance the physical ecology of the area, such as we've been working on in the Northeast Quadrant and the Greenway. We want to collaborate with these gathering spaces and people in them to make these things programmable. Permeability, I think, was another one that's like making connections through and across these areas. And then parking, try to minimize parking impacts of surface lots. And if we do have surface lots, we want them to be multifunctional because they're not going to be parked on usually the entire thing for the entire day. On top of that, we're also working with UC and our other stakeholders to look at alternatives to cars. We are having doing some work on a multi-modal transit center. And then we get down into great places, which is density. And we're concentrating density on priority sites and activating the street levels. We're also blending in mixed uses. Identity is another one we talk about, a pattern language, in these areas and creating cohesive identity. Transparency, we like the things to be opened up so you can, visual cues can cross through buildings and through the site and link everything together in these outdoor and indoor spaces. So the indoors can become outdoors. And then a transition. We spend a lot of time looking at transitioning our edges. We're addressing neighborhood edges with complementary scale, massing, programs, and character, and providing for a complementary transition from a site of more intense development, scaling down into less intense into residential neighborhoods. So with that, I'd like to say we've been using these principles for quite a while. We've encapsulated them in our plan, as I said, which has been on everybody's radar for a while now and been in the press, in the Northeast Quadrant, in the Innovation Greenway, and which is a central spine for guiding our future planning work. So with that, I would like to turn this over to Fred. And Fred, you've got the table. Thank you.
Good. Can you all see my screen? Hang on.
I can. Yep.
Okay, good. Thanks. Thanks, Franz. I think what Franz just did set up a very good foundation for Leslie and me to talk about. I'm going to show you some examples. I'm going to kind of do a placemaking 101. I'm going to show you a lot of projects from around the country. I won't go into the details of the project, but I do want to kind of reinforce the principles that Franz just talked about. And Leslie's going to go into a more localized version. But, you know, America, where we as a country, I think everything that Franz talked about is important because cities are becoming more and more important. And the country, as you can see on this map, is urbanizing in these great regions. And so the importance of placemaking is, I think, ever more important as we have a more urban world, a more urban country. And we look at placemaking through different lenses. One way to look at it is kind of a commercial, civic, institutional lens. And most great cities have great commercial areas, great civic areas, which are public, and great institutional areas. Certainly in the Uptown Innovation Corridor, you have all of these different elements coming together nicely. Another way to think about it is across scales. And we're always, as planners and designers, always thinking from the regional scale, but more importantly to the human scale. Because at the end of the day, as a person experiencing a place, it's all about the human scale and the block and the neighborhood you live in. The region is more of an abstraction, right? So we're trying to bring this down to the human scale. Another way to look at this, you can see it here, that up on the regional scale is a plan we did for Northeast Ohio, Cleveland, Youngstown, Akron area. That was kind of a high level plan, but we're always endeavoring to kind of cross all these scales and make design interventions at all these different levels, which is really important. So let me now go kind of transition to principles and practices. Think of this as like placemaking 101. One of the first things we try to do is look deeply into the land. The land will tell you a lot as a planner and designer. And so we're looking at, this elevations and this steepness of the slopes and, how the drainage works and all these ecological patterns, solar exposure. We're always trying to understand at any scale. We always look at the land first and try to understand the land. This is important in the Greenway corridor we're doing with Franz and Uptown right now. So just understanding it at a smaller scale. We also try to create a vision. This is a new community outside of Toronto that we're doing. And we're trying to create a vision, but more importantly, a flexible framework that will allow all sorts of different decisions to be made, from the community to the political, to the economic, to the social. They all have to kind of, come together. And those kind of diagrams here result in, concept plans that are a little easier to understand like this. And you can begin to see how the land tells us where the green corridors should go, where the riparian streams, become greenways, where you should put development and where you should not put development. Try to be ecologically sensitive and use nature as your friend. And then we try to create dense mixed use centers, whether it's a new community or a city. This placemaking revolves around oftentimes trying to get streets and transit and parks and density to all kind of work together in a way that complement and help each other. In Boston, we're working on a kind of the Seaport area, which is kind of Boston's second downtown, if you will. And it's kind of an interesting opportunity to think about an old city in a new way. And we're developing this idea of mixed use, where the ground plane is very, very active, where you have retail and food and beverage and street activating uses on the ground floor. And then as you go up, you can have office or residential, different types of uses, but this kind of vertical mixed use is really important to great placemaking. And then we have to think very carefully about how to arrange the uses thoughtfully around iconic elements. This is a project on Lake Ontario in Toronto, a former power plant site that's now being turned into a new mixed use neighborhood. And we're trying to look at ways to kind of connect to the lake and create a framework that it revolves around critical natural elements as well as key institutional buildings, and it create a series of blocks and streets. And then getting a little more granular, we get into like connecting lines of desire and how do people want to actually move through a place. This is in Portland, Oregon, a former industrial site on the Willamette River. And it's part of near downtown. So how do people want to connect back and forth? And that's another important part of placemaking. And then I think this is really important. The ground plane, you saw it in the earlier thing we did in Boston, but activating the ground plane, getting a whole series of different uses that work hopefully 24/7 or at least 18/6, grocery stores, retail, health clubs, creative office, restaurants, exercise areas, try to really make that ground plane super active. So as people are walking through here, they feel safe and comfortable and they feel part of a larger community. And you can see an example of this in Washington, D.C., where this is what I'm talking about, kind of active streets, people, good lighting, good landscape. It's pretty simple in a lot of ways, but it's often missing in many of our cities. Actually, Cincinnati's, over the Rhine, you get a lot of this happening in Cincinnati and Uptown and other parts. So cities are really, really catching on. Synergize program elements, reinforce community. This is a little planning geeky maybe, but It's the idea of trying to, mix things up a little bit. In the upper right, you can see using a school or a community center and the play fields to activate the area, not only for the school, but also for the adjacent community members. We're doing some of that within the Uptown Greenway as well. And then this idea of trying to create a place, for people to gather day and night, just simple, comfortable spaces that are well lit, that are open, that are publicly accessible. Got to have Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi tracks everybody. Then you can sit around, look at your phone, and hopefully be a little more social than staring at your screen, but which we all do too much of. And then, in social integration, and they're trying to get people to come together and use these streets and spaces in a more collaborative, communal way. Moving to the landscape, landscape's really important, and it depends, how much room you have to work with. And this is actually at Arizona State. So we have a big site, so we can actually kind of think new, where we're kind of weaving the landscape and the arroyos and the drainage ways into the plan in a seamless way. And then we have to often document our work with what we call design guidelines, and Franz knows about this all too well. But we have to signal your intentions for these plans and document them in a way that let the designers, the architects, the landscape architects that will follow to really understand what you had in mind in terms of the buildings and the landscape and the civic realm. And you got to really, we spend a lot of time doing detailed guidelines that also hopefully signal the intention, but also give the designers flexibility and freedom to do great design. The guidelines need to be kind of aspirational and not too prescriptive, in our opinion. But depending on the project, it changes for everything. And then the idea of getting granular early. Sometimes you have to take these big plans and find a phase one, find something you can design right away. This was a kind of a little park we did as part of the Dell Medical Center at Austin, Texas. But getting into the details and getting specific early helps people understand these conceptual plans in a more visual and granular way. Then thinking about certain catalysts, when you're doing great placemaking, sometimes you need a new transit center to kind of get things started, or you need some kind of new public space or civic space to get things started, to be a catalytic element around which other things can be developed. And then more and more, we're thinking about transportation as placemaking. As Franz said, streets are not just for moving cars back and forth. Streets are becoming, the term is complete streets. They're for people, they're for pedestrians, they're for different modes of transportation. It's not just about getting from point A to B fast in a car. It's about facilitating the pedestrian realm. So we got to think about transportation as a form of placemaking. And then the streets also have an ecological benefit. More and more, we're turning streets and our design work into, living ecosystems that deal with stormwater runoff. They become pollinator habitats. They become places for great landscape. They're functioning and providing a ecological and actually an engineering value, but they're beautiful and they're part of the larger ecosystem. So that they should be connecting greenways and green spaces. End of the day, it's all about people. We want to make sure that people are comfortable. This is in Ithaca, New York, a mall, pedestrian mall we just did, which was become very successful. It works, works different ways during the day and the weekends and evening. And then, this idea of social ecosystem. It's more than just design. It's about, end of the day, all this good design is just about making places great for people to live and connect better. And pulling everything together. So this ecosystem idea, I think, is interesting to think about. And then, crafting a vision, you got to have a strong vision. And then oftentimes it's, speed to market is really important. We have developer clients, institutional clients are like, how fast can we get this stuff going? And so we have to develop plans that go from, these interesting three-dimensional illustrations to, okay, we got to get stuff built. That's where the design guidelines come in, and these plans have to be implementable, real, market sensitive, and aspirational. We try to think of these little catalytic events. This was a little pop-up park we did in Boston next to the convention center called the Lawn on D. It was meant to be a placeholder for about 5 years while the new convention, or the convention center was expanding. And now it's become this very, very small little park. It was built for $1.5 million. And now it'll probably never go away. So it's become a really successful little public space. And in Florida, like Nona Medical Center, you got to understand the marketplace you're in, and you got to really design to that market so developers will be attracted to build it. Same here in Boston, we're trying to create mixed-use development along great streets and great corridors that create a great public realm and are implementable at a large scale. And you have to think about the tenants. You got to think very carefully what tenants need, what they want, how they're going to be using the space, and then encouraging diversity in everything. I mean, I think this is the new normal, and we have to bring people together in ways that they're comfortable. And I think, one of the most radical things you can do is introduce people to each other. So these public spaces become great mixing bowls, great gathering spaces. And so it goes from these kind of nice design diagrams to, being built. And that's the key thing. And I guess the last thing I'd say is community engagement, super important. Everything we do is very much based on community input, community needs, and we learn a lot from the people who live in the communities in which you're planning, and that's very valuable. We've been doing that a lot with Franz and Uptown. Just the last slide here is just some takeaways. This is not rocket science. We're trying to demystify the process by telling stories. That's kind of what planning and urban design is, really telling stories and showing people what can be. We have to be aspirational, but realistic. Plans are no value to nobody if they don't become real. We want to have big design ideas that are clear and understandable, that people can easily understand. They can go home and tell their friends and neighbors and their family about. Flexibility, super important. One thing we know for sure is, as planners and designers, everything we do will change, and you can't know the future. So you have to have plans that are adaptable. And then I mentioned community engagement, really important. So with that, I think I'll shut up and let Leslie take it from there. How's that?
All right. Thank you, Fred. That was very, very good presentation. And just love the graphics as well. I think it told the story very well for everyone to understand what we've been working on in Uptown and placemaking, and then also some of the guidelines we've been trying to follow and how they're applied in other locations. So now I'd like to turn it over to Leslie and let her do her thing here for us. So Leslie, it's all yours. Probably need to unmute.
There we go. I am unmuted now. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Franz, and thanks, Fred. That was very informative and actually really segues perfectly into, as Franz put it, a hyper-localized perspective of specifically creative placemaking and, kind of what that means. And so you talked about in your last slide of your presentation, Fred, community engagement. And, so many, I think the streetscape from Ithaca and the Austin photo that you shared, and really all of them seem to really integrate elements of creative placemaking. And certainly that is a part of the larger conversation of the ecosystem that that developers and architects and folks like UCI and other planners who are making these great spaces really take into account and benefit from, really ultimately ends up benefiting everyone, and is absolutely about, as you said, bringing people together. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Clifton Cultural Arts Center and the ways that we have helped to activate and integrate creative placemaking into spaces specifically in and around Uptown. And so while we were founded by and sort of originated in Clifton, we are the only community arts center working in the Uptown neighborhoods of Avondale, Corryville, Cuff, Mount Auburn, and Clifton. And so we really have strategically targeted working in all 5 of those neighborhoods and beyond, and specifically in this area of creative placemaking. So really high level overview of what is creative placemaking in the context of placemaking as Fred talked about it. And that is just giving arts, that could be arts organizations, artists. Certainly all communities have culture bearers, people who have been there and really understand and live and breathe the culture of a community. And so getting those people involved early on at the community development table, at conversations like this, that really will help to integrate the creativity of any given community aspirationally as well as realistically, and in all of the ways that we plan things. So it could be certainly real estate development, but also, as Fred talked about, transit opportunities. I love that image that he showed. I believe it was from Austin, where you've got artistic elements even of the sort of bus stop or the, you know, public transportation stops that are happening there. And so thinking about how do we incorporate arts values and cultural values in transit opportunities and safety issues, public health, all kinds of community issues, anything that really impacts the places where we live or we work, that we care about collectively. It behooves us to include the creative class in that planning process. And so functionally, what are some practical applications of creative placemaking? And there are many, and Fred's already talked about some of these. And so, you know, one is, as I just mentioned, community engagement. So as we start to, for instance, we're doing a new neighborhood plan in the neighborhood of Clifton that hasn't been done since the 1980s, and, you know, really involving arts and culture organizations and individuals, you know, as we talk about what our community values and how it will be arranged and function moving forward, and what are the principles that will guide development in that neighborhood. And so being a part of that process. So fairly simple, straightforward way to incorporate creative placemaking into your design process. Public art, certainly that's a realistic application, the way that it usually or sometimes can evolve and work into. And we have some really outstanding and I would say world-class examples of this, certainly in our downtown core, of the Artworks murals and other murals around town. And it could also be landscape design. Fred talked about that a little bit. In the picture that I have here on this screen, this is actually taken on Short Vine in Corryville, where I'm currently sitting. And this is shows a living wall here that the Short Vine Business Association sponsored and put in here, and creates a really lovely backdrop actually for some of the more performance-based creative placemaking work that we've done in the Short Vine Square to activate that spot. But just even that living wall itself is an example of creative placemaking. Certainly events and festivals, some that we have in Uptown include Clifton Fest, which is an annual sort of street fair with artist vendors, live performance, as well as chalk art on the street. But even the annual Avondale Health Fair that incorporates the arts actually with health and safety and wellness tips and tricks and techniques and activities. So, you know, that would be another great example of the way that creative placemaking shows itself. Branding and streetscapes has been talked about, and there's always artistic elements involved in that, whether it's creative design, graphic design, that kind of thing. Again, Short Vine's a good example of that has the nice archway and sort of consistent branding throughout the street. Certainly dedicated arts and cultural facilities or zones would be a very art-centric application of creative placemaking. And then the one that I'm going to delve more deeply into in the next few minutes is performing art in public spaces. So really activating shared spaces with the performing arts. So for instance, and this will be kind of a deep dive, and then I'll go through a few other examples of the ways that this has occurred in Uptown. But one high-level one is Wednesdays in the Woods. And this is a Clifton Cultural Arts Center program that began about 13 years ago, actually in a different space, but 4 years ago, we recognized that there was a need to move the concert series into a public location. And so some of the needs that were identified were to increase utilization of, again, a shared public space, to connect people, specifically in this instance, the very diverse residents of Uptown in what is pretty much a very centralized location. And we'll talk a little bit more about that location, but it is Burnett Woods, which is just adjacent to the University of Cincinnati and really shares borders with 3 of the 5 Uptown neighborhoods, Corryville, Clifton, and Clifton Heights. And then finally, to provide an attractive asset for the users of the nearby institutional partners and just large anchor institutions that we have in Uptown, specifically University of Cincinnati, Hebrew Union College, and Good Samaritan Hospital. And so to really also have an asset for their patients or students, faculty, and others who, hundreds of, or thousands at least, if not hundreds of thousands, who visit those institutions throughout the year. So partners involved a wide range of folks in this endeavor. The Clifton Cultural Arts Center is sort of the lead, and then Cincinnati Park Board, who of course owns and operates the Burnett Woods Park, as well as Cincinnati Parks Foundation, their kind of nonprofit arm, and then Uptown Consortium, Clifton Town Meeting, Clifton Business Association, and lots of other small business, foundation, and individual donors who have been a part of helping this get off the ground. So what is Wednesdays in the Woods? So it's free, weekly, always on Wednesday evenings throughout the summer, concerts that happen every night, 7 to 9 p.m. on Wednesday evenings, a diverse lineup of bands. This is really important, and we have consulted different community councils and other groups within Uptown to really draw in a diverse lineup of folks to perform at the concert series so that it's reflective of the vast differences that we have in terms of socioeconomic status and age and race in our Uptown neighborhoods. We also incorporate hands-on art making opportunities for children, and then food and beverage vendors on site. We've added in the past, and we'll continue to do this, sort of fun add-ons like nature hikes prior to the concerts throughout the park, led by parks naturalists, and fireworks, and sort of an extended ramped up July 4th celebration for the Wednesday night surrounding that. And then also incorporated social service nonprofit partners to collect non-cash donations on site. So again, to help cross promote, to reach a broader audience, and to just to have more partners involved and engaged, so that there are not just more people, but more diversity of the audience members that come together through this program. So what are some ways that we measure success in Wednesdays in the Woods specifically? We have administered surveys for every year of the 13-year concert series. And in 2019, because 2020 was a little strange due to COVID restrictions, but we had just about 4,000 participants throughout the 11 concerts that we hosted in the summer of 2019. 54% of survey respondents said that they met new friends or neighbors at that concert series, and 99% would recommend the concerts to their friends or others. I'm not sure who those 1% were. Maybe they just weren't into live music. And 41%, and this is a key driver for us because one of our goals has always been to support the neighborhood surrounding business districts and the food vendors and beverage vendors that we bring on site. So 41% visited a local business either before or after the concert. And we had 53 zip codes represented. So it obviously doesn't serve just Uptown. I think, the predominant service area is the residents immediately surrounding, but there are also people coming, which is great for the neighborhoods, of course, because it's bringing people in and associating. And this may be, one of the best byproducts and really intentions of this is associating Burnett Woods with, and really Uptown and this entire area, with a fun, a safe, a consistent place to have a good time and also connect with other people. And so that's something that has really, I think, in many ways been the major outcome of this particular series, the performing arts. So more examples of creative placemaking, again, specifically that CCAC has been involved in Uptown, and I'm sure there are many others as well. We have helped and partnered with Inwood Park Advisory Committee and Mount Auburn Association to host yoga and kids art activities in Inwood Park, another park run by Cincinnati Park Board in the neighborhood of Mount Auburn. Short Vine Square, I mentioned before, our piano series that we had there at lunchtime. So similarly to what I think Uptown Consortium plans for the Greenway project, potentially, where that's all going in on the MLK corridor, to intentionally design a space with the in mind that there would be public programming, concerts or art shows, outdoor arts exhibitions, whatever that kind of ends up being, but to have a space that's designed for that and is conducive to that is huge. And that's a benefit of thinking through creative placemaking process as you're designing spaces, so that it's not sort of an afterthought, but it's really thought of, how is this space going to be utilized? Because there will be certainly office tenants in that space, just as there are in the business district of Shortvine and the business district of Ludlow Avenue and Clifton. And so, what can be activated there to either bring people out or just provide another attractive amenity that makes a place more vibrant, right? And so that's something that's been really important in Uptown and certainly to CCAC as well. And then some other images I'll show you of the Avondale Business Center, Clifton Plaza that I've talked about, Calhoun Street Gallery, which is a vacant storefront that CCAC has activated with art shows, artist gallery shows. And then this picture actually that I have up on the screen right now is the fence line of a actual bird preserve in Clifton called the Ross and Woodsburg Preserve. And kind of brought on by circumstances of COVID and not being able to have indoor art shows in 2020, but also is an example of creative placemaking in the way that we activated a space, again, a public outdoor space with art incorporated and drew people together to experience art in public spaces. And so exhibitions, again, are one way that we have done this. The picture on the right here is at the Avondale Business Center, which is not designed necessarily to be an arts space, but they also happen to have some nice blank walls, which was a great space to incorporate our one of our largest exhibits of the year, which is called the Golden Ticket. It's a juried art show. And so you see here a beautiful quilt that was made, that was displayed, and that stayed up in the business center for about a month and a half. That art exhibition did. And then we, as I mentioned before, have, particularly in the time of COVID, but even beyond that, we'll be activating vacant storefronts and just other storefronts throughout the neighborhoods of Uptown with artwork. Performance series, I've talked a lot about. These are two examples, the one on Shortvine, and then on the right is the Live on the Plaza series. And similar to Shortvine, Clifton also has sort of a small plaza that's perfect for live performance and activation to bring people into the business district or to just provide another amenity while they are visiting the restaurants and shops and things on the Ludlow Business District. Examples of events and festivals on the left here is the Avondale Health Fair that we were a part of, and again, incorporating some artistic activities during the festival. Really, excuse me. Can everyone still see my screen?
Yes.
Sorry. Okay, great. And then on the right is Blink, which hopefully everybody on the call is from Cincinnati and is familiar with Blink, but Blink is a fantastic example of creative placemaking and the way that Artworks and the Chamber of Commerce and Arts Wave and others within the city have really activated and brought people together through not just the city, but the greater Cincinnati region and beyond. And CCAC was part of the Blink Parade, which was a wonderful way to get our neighbors and the folks from Uptown together to be able to, all kids and adults made superhero light up costumes. And then we all gathered and went downtown together to be participants in this greater festival that was happening in our city and really bringing positive attention to the city. So this, ultimately the point to the goal of creative placemaking, just like with placemaking, is building a sense of community, pride of place, and in this specific instance of creative placemaking, integrating the arts as I mentioned at the forefront of design and development, all the way through to, once the spaces are built, to really activating those spaces, whether that's with concerts or performances or visual art, murals, and other types of things like that. And so I think the thing I want to really emphasize too about the performance space is that while it is a temporary, the act of going to a performance or participating in a performance like a concert or a Shakespeare in the Park or something like that is certainly temporary, but it has the potential to bring lasting change. And so, you know, it's certainly a collective communal experience. So Fred was talking about, you know, people coming together and having free Wi-Fi and looking at their screens. We're trying with the arts to get them off their screens and really engaged in a performance. And so, you know, whether that's sort of a passive performance of a piano concert happening for 2 hours during lunchtime on Short Vine Square, or maybe a bit more interactive, you know, performance for kids with madcap puppets coming to a space and really engaging them. You know, the idea is to get people together, to make new connections, to really build this sense of community, and to really transform that place potentially into a spot that, you know, you feel like is part of a larger thing. And so it's bigger than yourself. I think that can lead to inspiring civic participation and engagement, certainly at a very intimate level, personal level, but also as that collective experience. And so, you know, as people continue to associate a place with that feeling of belonging, then that's really the ultimate goal of creative placemaking. And it has lots of wonderful byproducts as well, like feeling safe, feeling comfortable, feeling like this is my space and I have ownership of this and I want to keep it nice and free of litter and activated and all that good stuff. But you know, we're very proud certainly of the work that we've done and happy to be a part of the Uptown communities. So.
Thank you, Leslie. That was fantastic. I mean, it really starts to put in focus, I mean, the place, what we call creative placemaking. You know, really what creative placemaking does is puts the arts at the table with developers, land use planning, transportation planning, economic development, everything else, infrastructure, everything. It starts to blend in that piece that's been missing in some of these, I guess, instances of initial stabs at placemaking in other places where the arts are sort of like overlooked. It becomes so technical. It's really like a little place to go out and have a bar, drink, and hang outside for a while. That's not real placemaking. And so I find that bringing the arts into this is very, very important. I mean, we have talked here about actually instituting art as a wayfinding scheme on public right-of-way. We've talked with Fred about this and some other people, and utilize sculpture, art, everything else is a point of wayfinding. And so you can't just keep it in one place and say it only goes here. I like what you did with the fence line, the exhibition of art like that. It's sort of like pop-up placemaking. You know, it really is. And I think that's very interesting because if you look at Uptown as a whole, okay, then we are making placemaking occur throughout all of Uptown, okay, even these little pop-up things. So activating spaces you would never think about before. And I think that's very, very good. And ties right back into what I had mentioned earlier about transformative placemaking, the integration of things like this. It's the integration of the arts, healthcare, transportation, community development, all that starts to blend together. And that's the approach that we decided we would follow when we started putting things together here in Uptown is also, and made that like the top of the list for what we're doing in the innovation corridor. So thank you very much, both of you. And now I think we will get into questions and hopefully some answers. Fred, first question here is at a high level, can you really cover the principles about great streets, spaces, and places, and how those have guided your work and you're doing now, but also for future development?
Sure, and I just want to say, I thought Leslie's presentation was terrific. It showed at a granular, hyper-local level all the things we would hope would occur in the places we design. So thank you for that. Even sometimes where there's unplanned or tactical urbanism spaces where people just use fences, for example, whatever you have, right? You find a way to take whatever you have and make it a placemaking concept. But that was great, Leslie. So anyway, I think to answer Franz's question, you know, great streets, great spaces, great places. I'd say for great streets, and Franz covered it nicely, I think the number one thing about a great street is you have to get the scale right. You have to get the dimensions of the street. It can't be too wide or too tight. And it's like kind of a Goldilocks thing. You know when it's just right, you know, it's not too formulaic. If it's too wide, you're going to feel it's too much about the cars. So it's a mixture of getting the right of way correct. And that when planners, people like me spend a lot of time fussing over 3 feet or 4 feet in front of a store, or how wide the sidewalk should be, and how big the tree grade should be, and stuff that most people would wonder, what are you worrying about that stuff for? It's really important. And when you walk on a great street, you just know it. Like over the Rhine, I think, for example, you walking over the Rhine feels, those blocks and streets feel really good. So I think that's for great streets. For great spaces, I'd say get the size right. You know, again, a lot of times parks are too big. You know, it's amazing what you can do in a small space. And we just did a public square in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's not very big, but it's super successful because everyone's kind of pushed together a little bit. Now it's pre-COVID, you know, the COVID world is going to change some of the stuff a little bit, but you know, we'll get back there. We'll get back to where we were. And so you don't want to make the spaces too big. And I think some of the words Franz used, like, you know, permeability, letting these spaces kind of bleed into each other, not being too rigid on making the edges overlap. It's like an ecosystem. It's the most interesting, where two different, you know, biozones overlap. That's where the activity occurs. Same with cities. You know, you want to get those spaces right. And then great places, I'd say it's all about mixing the uses, getting mixed up uses, getting mixed uses, getting the density correct. I think density is generally our friend. You want more density rather than less. And then taking advantage of, you know, if you have water is always magical. If you have, like, you have the Ohio River, that's great, you know, but if you don't have a river, you make one with a splash pool or a pond or something. Take advantage of views. I think mixing in food and beverage, music. And yes, I do think people spend too much time on their screens. So, but, you know, get their heads out of it. So anyway, that's a quick, and then last thing, programming is really, really important. And Leslie just gave you a great example of that. Programming can be formal, which you saw some good examples of, and it can be informal, where you just let the space be and make sure that people in the space can just move things around. Like there's some little pocket parks in New York where people can actually just move the chairs around within, you know, so they can kind of follow the sun. But don't make things too fixed, I guess. So that's
okay. Thanks, Fred. It sort of gets back into some of the earlier discussions we've had about making the place attractive, sexy, place you want to go to. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's not just, you know, go down there, hang out, have a beer, leave. But you have activities. It's programmable. It's flexible. Right. And it changes over time. It has to stay fresh. You have to refresh this thing all the time. I think that's critical to any of this. Okay, so that's a good point. Now, Leslie, you're on the spot. So how is placemaking a tool for change, especially social change?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, I point back to our Burnout Woods, Wednesdays in the Woods example. You know, certainly, and what you just said, Franz, is exactly right. You have to keep things fresh. You know, there has been at different times, really throughout the 100 or so years that Burnout Woods has been a public park, music brought into the park. But I think that, you know, leading up to the years that we kind of took over doing a concert series there, that, you know, participation in that had kind of waned. And while there certainly have always been people who use the park for, you know, hiking and bird watching, there was less sort of certainly formal activity and very clear intention to bring people from diverse neighborhoods and backgrounds together through one communal experience. And so I think that for us was, you know, a very strategic objective of bringing the concert series to Burnout Woods, where it is located, the park that it is. And so how do you know, see that change? Well, certainly anecdotally, but even in more formal feedback, qualitative feedback and quantitative from users of certainly the concert series, they either hadn't been, I talked to one grandmother and her granddaughter who came the first year that we had the concert series, and that grandmother said that she had not been to Burnout Woods for years because she had a perception that it was, you know, unsafe, or just there wasn't any sort of real reason for her to get there. But then she saw on the Mount Auburn Facebook page that there was going to be a concert. And so, you know, she and her husband, who have the grandkids every Wednesday night, decided to come up and, you know, just said so many things about how wonderful it was to see so many people in the park, so many people from different backgrounds, enjoying music and enjoying that space together. And, I won't take credit for all of the changes that have happened in that space, but really just in the last, few months to a year, there's been a new playground that has popped up. There's been increased volunteerism, and, a lot of people that have come to the concert series are now interested in, helping to repaint and clean picnic benches and tables that are used during that time, and picking up litter and that kind of thing. And so, I think slowly but surely, or in some cases quickly, the change comes in, again, that perception, that ownership of a place, and that real intentional desire to bring people from various backgrounds together through a shared experience. And that's change, physical change, but also social change that has resulted from that specific instance.
Very good. Thank you very much. I'm just thinking as you're talking about that, as placemaking covers, in the past, placemaking has been considered just public realm. Mm-hmm. Fred, you've heard that, just public realm. But it also affects and actually becomes part and parcel with the private development realm, because they feed to each other. Okay, that's that seamless integration we were talking about, mm-hmm. how they work together, and one supports the other, complements the other. And so you also generate areas where you have the private space, you have a semi-private or semi-public, and you have full public space. And how those edges sort of bleed together and work together, I think, are critical to the success of any placemaking. Okay, it's that blending. And just thinking too very quickly, I look back, is that over the years, placemaking goes way back. We just didn't have the name for it. All right, we just did stuff. Ed, Fred, you and I are old enough to remember all that. Okay, it's like back when I was doing resorts in the Caribbean and places with the Brits, we were creating places. Okay, we just didn't call it that. We just knew that this is attractive to people. They're coming here to have fun. They're coming here to have conferences, et cetera, et cetera. And it became a place for them. And they always came back. It was that destination that they wanted to come to. And so if we can try to incorporate elements of things like that, okay, into placemaking, into our strategy for creating these new places, I think we'll be much more successful. Mm-hmm. So, Fred, I'm going to ask you a question now on a national level. Okay, national level. Why is placemaking such a critical element in land use planning and design?
That's a great question. I think, if you think of it in the three legs of a stool, there's kind of a real estate economic side to it, which I won't talk about too much. There's a sustainability side, and there's kind of a social equity, social justice side to it. And I do think maybe in the era that we're in, that might be the most important thing to just speak briefly about, because places, and Leslie showed some great examples of how you get people to come together, to meet each other, to interact, to get to know each other better. And I think that that's really important to our cities and to our whole way of life. And we have to get to know each other better. We got to get more comfortable with each other. We got to blend in and mix up with each other more. And I think these places we're talking about, they become a venue to do that, so people can get to know each other. And I think technology has atomized us and fragmented us in so many ways where, we normally I'd be in Cincinnati doing this with you. It'd be a lot more funny. I could see the people I'm talking to, but it's a new world, and hopefully we'll get back to the one we were in for a while. But I think, we have to kind of, human touch and human interaction is just so important to our well-being. And I don't think we're going to, technology enables us to disconnect from each other in so many ways. And so I think that's why placemaking is ever more important. I think people are human beings are animals that want to get together. I mean, we're social beings. And so I think that's maybe the best answer I can give.
I think it's a very good answer. Goes and sort of leads into a point I want to make, is that bringing a lot of different people into the mix and making them feel like they're part of the solution. Mm-hmm. Is the engagement process.
Right.
And we at Uptown spend a lot of time in community engagement.
Mm-hmm.
Just again, I'll go back to our big planning efforts, and Fred, you've been part of this engagement with Avondale.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in the public presentations, and the open houses, virtual open houses, are kind of weird. It's kind of strange. You know? Someone got used to those, but I don't like those. But anyway, we've done a lot of that because we wanted a lot of our solutions in the Greenway, et cetera, were done based upon our guideline principles, but also they needed to be adapted to some of the wishes, desires, and wants of the neighborhood. Okay, so we did a lot of that because the neighborhood pointed out they wanted to have programmable space, wanted to bring up food trucks. They wanted to have art shows, wanted to have concerts. They want to have, you know, public events there. And so we went back, if you remember, Fred, you all went back and we designed sort of that southern edge of the Greenway, be much more flexible, okay, and programmable. So these things are very important that you do engage with the people that are going to be using it, for sure, okay? And we do that when we build office buildings, okay, definitely. So we need to bring that down now, start really engaging the people who are going to be utilizing this and making it successful in the long run. So now I have some more questions here. What time is it? It's got 5 minutes. So I'm going to flip another one to Leslie here. Okay, we're going to go back and forth here. And just a question, how do you measure success from your perspective in this?
Yeah, well, I mean, some of the ways is what we've, you know, what I showed with the Wednesdays in the Woods sort of metrics that we put up, right? So how many people are visiting the business districts, either in or around wherever we're trying to activate, you know, particularly small businesses, that kind of thing. Certainly engagement with our partners. So for instance, with Wednesdays in the Woods, talking then following up with Hebrew Union and UC and Good Sam Hospital to, you know, see if they've seen a difference. Stories, individual stories, like the one that I shared from the grandmother. So, and then, you know, I think that ultimately it is though that change over time and the way people associate with that place. And so those are some ways. There's some empirical metrics that we can use certainly in surveying and just getting feedback, sheer numbers, right? Like if people are enjoying something, they're gonna come and be a part of that. And so, and I think over time, you know, I certainly feel like, and I know you guys do too at UCI, that, you know, there can be some very real benefits in terms of decreased blight, decrease in potentially you know, crime and other, you know, litter, other types of activities that are not welcome things in a community or a neighborhood. So there are lots of different ways to gauge success. Those are some of the things that we've used.
All right, that's very good. Because that's always one that's on the table is how to, you know, especially if you get funding, okay, for some of these events, they want to know, okay, was it worth the money? Okay, so there has to be some way to evaluating that. So, and I think that gets back into the sustainability of these spaces as well. So I think, see, I got 3 minutes. So here, let's do this. I'm just going to do a real quick wrap up of this. Fred, if you could really just summarize in a few words, no more than 4 or 5 pages, really what you've learned from placemaking in your experience and also just from this entire discussion.
Yeah, I think getting things built, right? Getting from these wonderful plans I showed you a lot of to the kind of things Leslie showed as the programming, but also just the redevelopment. So I think the most successful redevelopment is happening at a neighborhood and urban district level. I look at Over the Rhine in Cincinnati. I look at University Circle in Cleveland. Columbus certainly has, I think, some good examples of that. Look at a little place like Greenville, South Carolina, which transformed its downtown from a textile, kind of was boarded up when we first started working there around 2000. Now it's this cool little mid-sized city. But it's happening more at the block by block neighborhood layer. You got to get this stuff granular and kind of go street by street sometimes. And you got to worry about gentrification too. You got to make sure that everybody's part of it and it's inclusive. But I would say the best success stories are at a sort of neighborhood district scale, if that helps.
Good, thank you. Leslie, same question.
Yeah, I would just piggyback on that to say, and I should have hit this maybe a little bit harder, but there are always culture bearers in every neighborhood, right? So you guys talked about placemaking, and creative placemaking has probably been happening for hundreds of years. It's kind of, you know, maybe in the last 15 to 20 years become an actual sort of like thing that you can now find resources on. And I'd say for those, you know, in this last minute that are looking for more information, particularly on funding. So the Kresge Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, has a, you know, really had a big push for creative placemaking in around 2010 to present. And so much of that, though, is about incorporating the culture and the arts that are already in a place, you know, to move it forward, certainly, and accomplish all the things that we've talked about today. But that should not be sort of forgotten or overlooked. And I think that's particularly with creative placemaking, the integration and the weaving that in is so important to having wonderful spaces and places.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So listen, it's time to wrap up. So thanks to everyone again for joining us. And Fred and Leslie, we appreciate your time and all the information you shared with everyone today. And we'll be sending a follow-up email with a link to this presentation and plan to include the PowerPoints presented today. So everyone who's attended this, have a great rest of the day. And hopefully we'll have another one of these soon. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.